Hi, I'm Nicole Ringgold. Today I am going to show you how to make something that looks like this. They are barnacles that I found that are still attached to the stones. I love these. And of course, when I collected them, the barnacles were not alive. So this is essentially what it looks like in the end. Thank you to Rio Grande for sponsoring my YouTube channel. As always, you can reference the discount code down in the description for this tutorial. And again, as always, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them below and I will do my utmost to answer in a timely manner. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy. I love to sift through all of my rocks and glass and things that I've collected, but here's a close-up of some of the rocks with barnacles that I'm talking about. And when I first found one of these, I wondered, oh my goodness, how can I fabricate barnacles in silver and make them look like they've actually adhered to the stones? So this tutorial is going to show you how I figured out how to do that. Your options are pretty unlimited. You can use stones that are flat, like this. You'd have to shave down the bottom to have it fit in the bezel. But I think I'm going to use, this is a piece of glass with concrete adhered to it somehow. I've been waiting for the perfect project and I think this is it. So to make the barnacles, this is 16 gauge sterling silver round wire. And I use half hard in my round nose pliers. I start with the tip of the round nose pliers and then I work my way downward. And the reason I use half hard wire is because it holds its shape better as I'm creating this coil. I'm circling and circling, progressively becoming larger. In the end, it's going to look sort of like a coiled cone. And the height of this coiled cone will depend on how high you want your barnacle. I'm probably only going to wrap it 5 times, maybe 6 for the next one. Once I reach the desired height, then I'm going to use my flush cutters. Okay, I've decided to do 5, actually maybe 6. Then I'm going to use my flush cutters and I'm going to snip the bottom. You just want to be sure that it sits straight down on your soldering platform and doesn't fall over. These flush cutters are from Lindstrom. They are super precise, really sharp. They just sent them to me and I love them. I use an oxygen propane Little Smith, and I'm showing you how much propane I start with for this project, adding the oxygen. And so now I'm placing my pick on top of each of the cones to put just a tiny bit of pressure on it. Not a lot, don't press down firmly, just a little bit to make sure that when you heat it, it slumps together and there are no gaps in the wire. And then I'm circling the piece and running my torch up and down so that it's got a soft fuse. A soft fuse is when you can still see the details between the wires. And then I'm going to try to subtly turn it into a hard fuse, which means that you see less of the details. And if I were to try to pull it apart, it would be impossible. Circling and circling. And then when I'm happy with that, I will move on to the next one. And I'll repeat the directions for you just to be sure they're clear. Okay, to repeat, I'm going to put my pick on top. I'm not putting a ton of weight on it, not a lot of pressure, just gently pushing it down as I'm heating it. That encourages the coil to smush together basically, because when you go to fuse something, everything should be touching. There shouldn't be any gaps. It needs to be touching in order to fuse. So I went from a soft fuse and now I'm trying to blend things together for a harder fuse. And then keep in mind that the torch temperature impacts the hardness of the silver. So a regular torch temperature actually work hardens your pieces. So I'm going to my regular torch temperature and I'm adding propane, the red, so that now I'm going to anneal the fused pieces because annealing softens your silver because I'm going to carve into it. If I didn't if I didn't soften the silver, then I might break or dull my bits as I'm carving into them. From here, I'm using these Dideco Elite cutoff wheels. Sometimes they're called separating discs. These large ones they're like a Mercedes-Benz. And I'm using them, I'm holding my barnacles with straight nose pliers, needle nose pliers, and I'm using the cutoff wheel to carve in channels, and I'm turning them as I go. And the reason I'm using these needle nose pliers to hold the piece is because if I were to be carving in with this cutoff wheel and holding the barnacle with my fingers, it would get so hot my fingers would burn. So I definitely recommend holding with pliers. So once you've carved the lines all the way around, you're probably going to have to rotate your piece, your barnacle, so that you can access the bottom. And then once you do that, you can use the same tool, the same cutoff wheel, to create ribs. Maybe that's not the right word. I'm really sorry. I have a lot of languages that go through my brain. Maybe they're called scallops. And in any case, I'm going back into the areas that I carved and creating little channels and making sure that they're, I don't know what you call them, bumps. Here's a closer image so that you can see what I'm talking about. Sorry, struggling with my English right now. In any case, here I have two barnacles. I'm applying flux, and I have a piece of hard solder to the side, which I'll point out. I'm just trying to figure out the orientation. I'm going to solder these two barnacles together. Okay, here we go. There's the hard solder. Okay, this is the amount of propane. Add oxygen if you're using a little Smith torch. I'm going to pick solder. Heat your solder, not your pick. Make sure your pick is clean. Heat the mass. And then when the mass, you've burned off the flux. When the mass is ready, you can place your solder because your piece is warm enough for the solder to stick. And then heat the mass and then go directly across from where you want the solder to pull through. Moving forward, here's a Green Lion soft frame and drill bit chart for 16 gauge wire. I'm going to use this drill bit to drill just a pilot hole basically on the underside of the two soldered together barnacles. FYI, you can also just Google that chart or find it on Rio Grande's website. If you're struggling with the drilling, make sure your piece is annealed. So from here, you're going to create a pin. This is a 16 gauge round wire. I love my third hands. And then I'm going to place the 16 gauge wire in the pilot hole that I just drilled. And then in this next shot, you'll see that my pin isn't exactly straight, which isn't a big deal. I can straighten that with pliers when I'm done. Be sure to flux everything that your torch touches. So this is what's going to happen. That's medium solder. You're going to heat the entire mass. Once it's sufficiently heated, you're going to turn your torch, heat the wire, and sweat solder just above the wire, and then heat the mass again to draw solder from the wire down into the hole. So now I'm going to show you how it actually happens. Okay. I'm going to pick up my solder with my pick. This is medium solder, by the way. Heating the mass. I'm going to heat it, and I'm waiting to see a slightly yellow hue, which means solder flow point. Now I'm turning my torch to the side, and I'm going to sweat the wire to the pin just above the hole. You don't want it to just ball. It literally needs to puddle. And then you heat the mass. I need to balance my piece here. Heat the mass, and then the solder will drop down into the hole. Set the barnacles and pin aside. And so here's bezel wire. This is the standard that I use. And I'm going to wrap it around the, I don't know what you would call this, a glass concrete piece. And as you see, I'm going to wrap, but I'm going to overlap. I've covered this in a previous tutorial, but if you haven't seen this, that might be a good review. I overlap the bezel wire, and then I remove the stone or the thing that I'm bezeling. As you can see here, it's an overlay. And then I remove what it is that I'm bezeling, and I'm going to snip through both layers. I'm using flush cutters to do so, and I actually keep the patch just in case I screw up, so don't throw that away. And because I've used flush cutters, one side of the bezel wire is, well, not flush. So I take the flush cutters and then I turn them around and make sure that the other side is flush, and then that makes a perfect seam. No filing is necessary with this process. Put it down on your platform, make sure you flux. I flux everything, and so then there's my hard solder. I flux everything inside and out, pick soldering, heat the solder, not your pick, and I'm going to drop the solder on the top of the bezel as I'm heating back and forth, kind of like a pendulum, until it's ready, and then boop, it drops down into the seam. And I usually flip up the bezel so that I can heat the inside, which draws the solder through and makes it a seamless connection. And in the meantime, I have a 22 gauge sterling silver sheet, and I'm going to anneal it. And if you have not seen my previous YouTube tutorials, I would suggest going back and watching them to understand why I anneal, because it literally is a foolproof way of soldering. You want to make sure that your stone or your glass or whatever it is that you're bezeling, you'll want to make sure it still fits inside the bezel. And then figure out exactly where you want to place your barnacles. And when you do so, you can use a Sharpie and just make a spot. And from there, you're going to drill a hole. Here's the Rio Grande product number for a 2mm diamond core bit. I referenced this in previous tutorials, but basically you'll need your 2mm drill bit, you'll need water. Your drill press will need to be set at 1,000 RPMs, and I'm putting a piece of wood in the water, and this is just a dog bowl. And here's my piece. Be sure that your piece is submerged in the water. I put it on the wood block. It needs to be, again, submerged in water to alleviate dust. And then I'm slowly, don't go quickly, slowly pumping the drill bit down through the piece until it pops through the other side. If you go too quickly, it'll blast through the other side or break your stone / glass / shell. In any case, go slowly. Okay, it's gone all the way through. I'm just making sure that it's a nice, clean hole. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm taking this 22 gauge annealed and pickled sheet and I'm putting flux on both sides. Definitely want to point out that this is a tie quad from Lion Punch Forge. Probably one of the best investments you might ever make. My discount code if you decide to order is Ringgold12. Place your sheet that's already fluxed on both sides, top and bottom. Make sure that you put your bezel wire on there, and now I'm using medium solder all lined around the inside. And I'm going to turn on my torch and heat from below, primarily, a little bit on top, but primarily from below. Using my pick to ensure that the solder is nice and snug up against the bezel wire. Heating the mass, the sheet, around the outside, on top, a little bit on the inside, but mostly underneath, which will draw the solder down and into the seam all along the bezel wire. A major thing that I watch for is when, as you can see it happening now, is when the sheet is starting to turn this yellow hue. That means solder flow point for easy solder. So it's solder flow point plus a little bit more for medium solder. And there my solder flowed all the way around. So now I'm going to saw all the way around my bezel. My saw frame, just so you know, is from Green Lion saw frame. Use sandpaper to sand off all the edges. Okay, so now I'm going to add a bail. I'm fluxing everything. I have a previously fused jump ring. This is easy solder. I'm going to take a piece of easy solder and sweat it to the bail. Turn the bail upside down so that the solder is against the sheet. And then you're going to heat the mass, the entire setting, everything that is not, basically everything that's not that little jump ring. I use my pick to steady things. Obviously, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. Okay, so now I'm heating the mass. I'm heating everything, focusing my torch on everything except the bail, and using my pick as a heat sink just in case to protect the bail. And then when I see, the color of the silver turn a little bit yellow, I can get closer and closer and closer to the bail and the solder flows. You want to make sure everything is finished for your setting. And then you can place the stone or whatever it is into your setting. And I'm using a roller or a pusher, and I'm going to focus on the sharpest edges first to set it. Working from bottom up, working the sharpest edges, making sure that the bottom is pushing the bezel against whatever you're setting to adhere it down and up. First down and then working upward. And then once you've set the sharpest corners, use the same tool to work along the edges. As you can see here, I'm working the bottom, up over the corners, a little bit further up, and then I'm going to work all the way up and even up and over the stone, glass, whatever it is you're setting. I'd say that, 95% of my work is done with the pusher, and then I move over to the burnisher, which is this. The burnisher is literally supposed to be for the top top edges of your piece, and you can see it kind of looks like I'm peeling potatoes. I use it to burnish the very top of the bezel. I've oxidized my barnacles, put them through the hole, all the way through the stone, figure out the orientation that you want. And then once you do that, you take flush cutters and snip. You barely want anything sticking up. Look at how tiny that is. And so then now I'm using a frets. This is a riveting hammer, and I'm going to hammer across. Sorry, not sure if you heard my dog. Anyway, hammer across with the sharp edge of the riveting hammer. And that basically what that's doing is splaying a pin. Let's see if you can see it closely here. And then you'll take it and turn it over and use the burnishing side of the hammer. Circle around the outside, move inward, and there you can see you're basically creating a nail head or a pin head. And then from here you can polish. These are abrasive fiber wheels. I use these and sunburst radial discs to polish up my pieces. That's it. Let me know if you have any questions, comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. I truly appreciate you. And let me know if you have any questions. Please post comments and give me feedback and let me know what else you might want to learn. Thank you so very much. I hope you enjoy.